Sometimes life is yikes.
And that's okay. You're not alone. Welcome to Yikesland. Hello, and welcome to Yikesland, our podcast about depression and mental health and all things yikes in your life. I am Kris Fung. I am here with my co-host.
It's Jelani Hoon.
And we are bringing you the views from Yikesland on this beautiful Tuesday. And why is it a good Tuesday, Jelani?
Because every Tuesday with you here with us, guys, is a great day. We want to make sure that you guys stick with us, not only to just listen to the show, but we want you to make it to every Tuesday and every Tuesday thereafter. Because every day with you guys in it is a great day.
One Tuesday at a time. That sounds like 1 2 day at a time. I don't know. Well, we are going to start this episode off like we always do. Jelani, how are you?
Wow, right out the gate. Okay. The Chronicles of Jelani recently, in recent episodes, have been trying to change up everything and be positive, be changing, in the past recent couple of weeks, I would say, feeling a shock of that kind of self-sabotage come creeping in. It's been kind of a weird roller coaster. I'm feeling more and more drained, if that's a feeling. A feeling.
That's a feeling.
And so it's become a thing in the past couple of weeks. I've just slowly been getting more and more drained. It's probably just, the normal stressors of life, getting to me a little bit. But still
I feel
here.
like the season's changing also. Is that, I don't know if that's a thing for you. Any seasonal changes are upsetting to me.
Yeah, right now, it's getting to be like a shock now because we're Milwaukee, Wisconsin guys, and we're transitioning from cold winter is here and
to very cold spring. It's not actually nice out yet. There are no flowers and it's still like below 40 degrees a lot, but then the snow, which was pretty, is gone, and so it's just cold for no reason with nothing.
So it maybe
nice.
The environment shock is like getting to me, but I guess I don't know. Things have been swirling around in here, I guess, a little bit about just life in general and things that I want to do, want to achieve, and things like that. And it's just been kind of a weird past couple weeks of just having it swirl in my head, and that depression monster peeking its ugly little head out and saying, hey, guess what, I'm still here, buddy. So besides that, I've just been taking a day at a time and just trying not to spiral or anything like that. So I'm seeing friends, seeing family and stuff like that, seeing you. Here you are. It's
Tuesday at a time.
One Tuesday at a time. So it's all positive. And so I'm just trying to keep it that way. So just keep coping with it. How are you doing?
I am pretty good, I guess.
Oh, okay.
I did not prepare an answer to that question, so I'm just evaluating it now. But I've been busy doing work stuff in a good way. I had talked previously about getting all my, the OCD inside my head is really pleased about Sharpies and planners and sticky notes and all that stuff. And so I had gotten a bunch of those for the new year and been doing just some physical organization stuff that tends to make me a lot less stressed.
Okay.
If I can just write down all the stuff that I have to do, which I know is a pretty common thing for sure for even quote unquote normal people that don't have anything wrong with them. Is that even real? Everybody has something wrong with them.
Everyone has something.
But I know that's a pretty common thing, but it's a thing that I don't realize how much it affects me and how good it makes me feel to have just all the little organizational tools at my disposal. But it definitely does So that has been helping with my goal setting and goal achieving. And then I mentioned last episode that I'm doing a fitness slash health challenge thing with some internet friends of mine. Although they're just called regular friends in 2019 because
Okay.
that's how we all meet our friends, I guess.
I mean, we meet in one way or another. Yep.
And so that just started in a real way this week. And so I think some of my goals, like I mentioned before, are just like eat breakfast, eat lunch, take vitamins, like move your body. And mine are pretty simple and pretty gentle, but those have been making me feel better.
That's good.
As I forget to eat breakfast and stuff like that just out of busyness. And for me, food definitely affects my mood a lot in ways that I never notice until it's too late.
Okay.
So having that reminder and being like, oh no, I'm going to lose points if I don't eat breakfast has been helpful for me. So that's good. And I went to the gym for the first time in so many months yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So I am sore but happy about it. Trying to take it easy. Like I mentioned before to you guys, I used to have an eating disorder, and that's kind of one of those things that they say like never goes away or like you're always in recovery. So I try to be really careful about not paying too much attention to like calorie counting or like exactly how much I weigh 10 times a day and stuff like that, because those are all things that they say are dangerous habits, especially for somebody who used to have an eating disorder. So whenever I make fitness goals and stuff like that, I just try to be really gentle and forgiving of myself if I don't meet them, and trying not to pay too much attention to numbers and trying to just be happy about how it feels good to move your body at all, and trying to not feel bad about like, oh, I'm so weak or I'm not meeting weight goals and stuff like that, because those are all things that like they teach you can kind of make you spiral back into a bad place as far as eating disorder and body image goes. So I'm trying to balance having fitness and health goals with not endangering myself and my eating disorder brain.
Oh, good.
And
Good.
it's going well so far. So
Well, I'm glad
fingers
that's
crossed.
going well. I'm glad that's going well,
Yeah.
and you're getting back into
Yeah.
a routine of things and taking care of your health by eating breakfast.
Yeah.
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, they say. I wouldn't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we're usually asleep for that. So
yeah. Usually,
that's fine.
usually I'm either asleep or trying to sleep or in transition between sleep and non-sleep. Yeah. Well, let's get to topic of the day then, or topic of the week, or topic of Tuesday. Topic Tuesday. Here we go. Topic Tuesday today is we touched on it last week, where we talked about a little bit in our how do we take steps to getting help, right? And I forget which one of us had touched on it, where being from an Asian background and growing up in an Asian household, there was some challenges, I guess you would say. And this week we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, because we are both of Asian heritage.
Oh, are you? I didn't.
Yeah, I am.
I didn't want to.
I didn't want to
assume.
I didn't want to assume. Yeah, we are both of Asian heritage, and we both come from different backgrounds, and so we kind of want to dive into what the Asian culture we've experienced and mental illness, how they collided, how do they relate to each other, how did they even, I mean, do they relate to each other at any way? Want to start off?
Yeah. Well, I will just start off by saying, obviously, there's not necessarily it's not like a monolithic Asian American experience as far as mental health goes. But I think there's a lot of commonalities. I don't have a ton of Asian friends in Wisconsin now, but I've grown up with Asian friends in California and New York. And definitely this is something that a lot of, but not all of my other Asian friends have shared with me, experiencing this sort of culture, I guess. Especially, I think, so for me, my dad is from Hong Kong, but I have largely grown up in the United States and was born here. And a lot of my friends are similar position as far as second generation immigration goes. And so I think that some of what I will talk about today may be, especially like a second generation immigrant thing. And so that might be something that is shared across other cultures that are also second generation immigrant cultures. You guys can let us know if you share these experiences.
Yes,
if you
please do.
are or are not Asian, or, you know, maybe you're not a second generation immigrant, but your family is like this too.
Yeah, exactly. Like everyone comes from different walks of life. We'll just speak to ours, and hopefully, if you relate, let us know if you do. You know, send us a little email or something like that. We'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah. But I theorize based on, you know, talking to friends and stuff, that there is some sort of shared, especially like some sort of shared pan-Asian American second generation immigrant experience as far as this goes. Because I think there's sort of a gap between what we grow up around as far as being a little bit more chill talking about mental health stuff, and then the way that maybe our parents grew up in other countries. So that's something that is somewhat true for me, and I've talked to a lot of, especially in college, a lot of my college friends had this same thing where we were all sad and our parents were all not necessarily using the same language to talk about mental health as we did. And so obviously Jelani and I are different types of Asian.
Obviously. But I don't know if you know this. We're not the same type of Asian.
But I think there is some shared experience to be had there, and maybe across other types of second generation immigrants. So I don't know if you want to go first or I can go first.
Well, okay. I mean, you did an intro for you. I'll talk a little bit about my intro here. For me, I was born here in the United States, right? But you know, my father came over from Cambodia. I am of Cambodian heritage, guys. I don't have the experience of immigrating here. I don't have the experience of already living in the other country. So I've grown up here, but I've grown up in a kind of amalgamation of like, oh, they came here from another country and they're learning as well how to live here in the United States as well. So it's a weird. I grew up basically in an Asian household. I mean, my father married a lady, my mother of Mexican heritage, so I am mixed. But primarily, a lot of the family and a lot of the people who I grew up around were of Cambodian heritage, and the household was very Asian as well. So I'll be talking more about like growing up as an American, being born here, an Asian American, growing up in a household like that isn't necessarily from here, the United States. So the mindset is different. It's seeing contrast almost, I guess. I think we can probably relate a little bit more on that too as well, with you immigrating here, and then just kind of the culture shock of like them being used to another country and then coming here and having certain things being talked about more openly, certain other things not being talked about more openly, and so it's a thing. Yeah, if you want to go first, please, by all means.
Sure.
I'd love to have you talk about it.
Well, like I said, my dad is from Hong Kong, and I largely grew up here, and I was born here. My first memories are from living in Hong Kong just because of the age that I was at the time that we lived there. So we spent time with the Asian side of my family in Hong Kong then, and then I also have some Asian side of my family in New York. So when we were in California, was kind of the only time that we were separated from family. The white side of my family, my mom's side, does live in Wisconsin, and there's definitely a difference between the amount of like nuance in mental health language, I guess, that I have experienced in my own family.
Okay.
So My dad is not necessarily the stereotypical Asian parent that you like see memes about on the internet. Like he's very gentle and just supportive and like you're doing a good job, like no matter what.
Mhm.
He's not at all where I got my sense of perfectionism and like my crippling self-doubt and my like, oh Christina, you're never doing a good enough job. That stuff I just made up in my own head. And I've experienced it from extended family. But that's never come from my dad at all. So I guess in a way I kind of lucked out. But we did talk about mental health in general terms when I was growing up in my family, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of, like I was saying before, there wasn't necessarily a lot of nuance. And it's not really a language barrier thing because my dad's been in the United States long enough that he's a very fluent speaker. He doesn't super have even an accent. He just sort of has a weird voice at this point.
Okay.
And he'll listen to this, but it's not a language barrier thing. It's just almost a generational thing in my immediate family where I think when my parents were growing up, they did not have their parents, and this is even true for my mom, talking a ton about mental health in the way that people who are growing up now talk about mental health. So I had mentioned before, like, I kind of really had to advocate very strongly for myself when I knew I had an eating disorder and like that kind of wasn't getting through to my parents where I was like, something's wrong. I'm eating to the point where I feel sick and I'm still eating and I don't know why. And I've never had this relationship to food before. And I definitely had some very clear and obvious signs of OCD, especially when I was a child that never got but I never got evaluated for them. And like, that was the point when I should have been evaluated because like now it's too late and it's all a part of my personality. And I don't know how to like my, whatever my OCD tendency is and my real personality are now so inextricable that like when I talk to them, when I talk to like my, when I've talked to therapists in the past about it, it's just like I have so many coping mechanisms on top of coping mechanisms on top of coping mechanisms that it's like there's so much to dig out there. And so I really wish that I had been able to express that better to my parents or that they had like sort of sifted that out of what was happening to me or what I was like as a child. But I guess it's hard because I have a lot of sympathy for that because like you're gonna mess up your kids no matter what you do. Like you can be literally the most perfect parent and you'll still accidentally mess up your kids in some way or another. And so I have a lot of sympathy for that and I have like no anger towards my parents about that at all. It's something we've talked about a lot and they've been like, I'm so sorry we didn't know that this thing. And I'm like, I understand. It's not like you're a mind reader. It's not like you should have seen through everything. But like I do wish that when I was growing up, parents and their, like, I guess I wish that we had the resources that I think kids are having more and more nowadays. I wish that we had had those when I was younger, even as far as having like school counselors and stuff where they can kind of, since they're with you at school, they can kind of have dialogue with your teachers and be like, hey, this kid in this class seems super weird about pencils and she's making a lot of lists and that doesn't seem normal. But as far as talking about depression, that has been something that I think my parents were pretty natural and good at because they sort of, for my dad especially, he had talked to my sister and I when we were younger about experiencing anxiety and depression and some really hard things in his life. And so those were always things that it was safe for us to talk about. Like I said before, though, even doing this podcast has opened up a new type of dialogue between me and my dad where we speak more freely and with more nuance about mental health. And so that has been awesome.
Yeah, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah. But my dad is sort of an anomaly as far as what you think of as the stereotypical Asian dad.
An anomaly.
And growing up around my extended Asian family is kind of a different story than being around just my dad. Like even with body image stuff, I have Asian relatives that like you go to Chinese family dinner and they like pinch the back of your arm and they like, you're not sure. Cause I don't speak, so the Chinese side of my family, we speak Cantonese. My Cantonese is bad. It has been better at certain times in my life and worse. And then some people in my extended family also speak other dialects that are more rare that I super don't know. And so like I'd go to Chinese family dinner and they'd like pinch the back of my arm and I couldn't tell if it was because I was too fat or too skinny. Like I knew it was a criticism.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing with Asian families.
And then I was like, I don't know in what way I have displeased you right now, but clearly something is wrong. And I think there is, this is true, I think, for a lot of like immigrant families, but there's a really strong food relationship there. Literally in Cantonese, the way that you ask how somebody is directly translates to have you eaten rice today? So there's a lot of like, like the Asian side of my family will ask if I've eaten as like a barometer for my mood. And I think that speaks volumes as to the level of attention that can be paid sometimes to like your actual mental health versus like your physical health and like how much you're eating being sort of like a proxy stand-in where you're not asking how are you, you're just like, did you eat? Like, and that's good enough. And it's not like, hey, are you depressed or anything like that? And so I think for me, because body image and eating disorder stuff has definitely tied into depression, that has been a thing that comes up a bunch where I'm like, oh no, I'm dreading the pinch and whatever comes after that. As far as like being told, because I don't like to pay too much attention to how my body is changing or whatever. Like I like working out and eating healthy, and I get upset when I like lose too much weight when I got sick, for example, but I don't like it being pointed out a lot because that kind of spirals me as far as mental health instability goes. So the food relationship and the like whether or not you're somehow too skinny or too fat, but no matter what, there's something wrong with you thing is definitely something that I have experienced that is very stereotypical Asian culture.
It's very ingrained in Asian culture.
Do you guys have that too?
So so in contrast with you, right? Yes, food is very much ingrained in Asian culture. It is like the pastime, I guess. It's family. I mean, that's why when you see it, family get-togethers, it's usually a round like table and like you're grabbing like from different dishes and everyone's there, you know. And
and like
it's not
aunties
just,
are putting food on your plate.
Exactly. Everyone's just like, oh, eat more or have some more or eat this, and it's like, no, I'm full, and it's like, nope, here you go.
Yeah, and it's like an insult if you say no, so you just have to eat the stuff anyway.
Yeah. So
those dinners were a nightmare when I had binge eating disorder.
Yeah, and so it's very much ingrained in Asian culture. Like food is very important, and it's interesting. Like hearing you talk about like your dad and growing up. My dad was the Asian of the family, what too is it's interesting, and so but it's almost a polar opposite. So my dad. While your dad was very soft and supportive, it's almost like a different tool, right? So you have your dad who's like the more softer tool, and then mine is the blunt hammer, right? So very much we don't. It's very much machismo, I guess, if you want to talk about it. Very much that if something's wrong with you, it's you try and get through it. There is no such thing as we don't talk about like mental issues or illness or things like that. That's not what our culture is about. We don't, that stuff doesn't exist, I guess. So growing up in that type of household, with the more abrasiveness of it, was kind of interesting because I've dealt with depression for a long time, since my younger days, and growing up in that way of just slowly feeling the self-worth get low, self-esteem issues, and growing up in the household where that stuff doesn't really exist, and it's not really like pointed out or noticed in that type of culture. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very difficult. It's very difficult, like, to try and like cope with what you're dealing with when, like, in your world, like in the world that you're growing up in, the environment that you're growing up in, it's something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's something we don't talk about, or it's something like even my father, like, he grew up in Cambodia. There was a whole big thing that happened in Cambodia where he went through as a child, like a big war, and came over as a refugee, and so he for sure has some issues or some trauma, probably some PTSD or something like that from those events, and it just, we don't talk about it. It's, we move on, and that's what we do, so it's kind of weird, like, so like the contrast here. So it's dialogue has never really been there, and my dad won't be watching this, but at the same time, like, he's at the same time he tries to be supportive, and he tries to do the thing, but at the same time, from what his upbringing, and especially where he grew up in, just a war zone, like, things like, get past it, you're hurt, walk it off, rub some dirt in it or something like that. It's more of just like, get past it. If you got a bad cough, control your cough and let's move on. That's what it is. And so growing up in that household, like, it was a difficult time. And it doesn't, like, and again, I love my family. I love my dad. I love my mom and everything like that. It's just, I guess, like, when we pointed out, like, when we wish things were more available to us when we were growing up, like, yeah, I kind of feel like we were, maybe even to some extent, this generation too, we are kind of like a transitional period where we are the generation where things are starting to come to be more widely open. Like right now, we're doing a podcast where we're talking about mental illness, and because we want to continue the opening of the dialogue.
Yeah. And hopefully later this podcast is considered super boring because everybody talks about their
exactly
depression.
Like,
that would be awesome.
I would like it if, like, years down the line, like, this is an ancient podcast of,
and
like,
they're like, why was this scandalous at all?
This was at a time where, like, people weren't really talking about it, and I think we're at the right moment of time at this moment, at this period of time where things are starting to open up and people are starting to create dialogues more, and we're not the only podcast out there, and people want to get people talking about it, so that way that future generations can get help, and people can get the recognition, recognized for, like, things like OCD or things that they might be dealing with along the way. And so, when people deal with depression or deal with, like, issues, and they shut themselves off, and some people might be able to point that out and, like, really focus on it. It's like, hey, are you doing okay? Do you need to talk to a counselor? Do you need to do something? Because again, as you grow up, like you said, your kids are going to go whatever way they're going to go, no matter what you do. You could be the most supportive, best parent in the world, and they end up going a different path that you're lay them on. So
yeah, and you say something that you mean as very supportive, and then they somehow wildly take it as, like, an affront, and that's.
And then at the same time, like, yes, I it's not played up to that comical effect, but my father was kind of like the, hey, are you a doctor yet? No?
Yeah.
Okay, talk to me when you're a doctor. But at the same time, like, it was always just, I wouldn't trade what I grew up in for the world. You don't know what's going to turn out, how it's going to turn out, but at the same time, like, yeah, growing up in that time, in that household where in an Asian culture we don't talk about it, and it doesn't really exist, like, and especially also growing up with the Latin mix that I have, the Hispanic Mexican side, that's also kind of more of just, hey, machismo type of thing, where it's like we kind of just work through it, where we break our backs, we move on, and that's what we do. And growing up in that type of household doesn't really like lend itself to like picking out like, hey, that kid's depressed, something's wrong with them. It's always pointed out. I was like, hey, stop being lazy, get up, do this, and it's a weird amount. It's a weird household to grow up in. Like, I mean, for you had like the eating disorder and then the OCD, but you were able to create the dialogue, right? Eventually, right down the line,
like it took some struggle.
It took some struggle.
With stuff that wasn't, because I think like the concepts of depression and anxiety were like fine with my parents, but then like other stuff was not stuff that they had experienced, and so I had to advocate more for that. And it was not until college that I was on my own enough to like really start going to therapy for that. But it was also in college that I was spending a lot more time with my extended Asian family again, after having, like, I had obviously lived in Hong Kong before, but I, was super little then. And so I was spending more time, going to Chinese family dinner, and spending more time with the Asian side of my family since I lived closer to them. And it was also then that I saw more clearly the contrast between like my dad and how he is versus like the rest of my Asian family. Because that was definitely more like a thing where, me and my cousins were being compared kind of, whether or not it was outright, like sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. That was definitely more of an experience where it was like, how are you doing in school? Like, tell me all your career aspirations and they better be good enough.
Yeah.
And like, I struggled too because I was dating a white guy, or Tim. I've talked about him on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, I had to kind of push to get him accepted enough to be allowed to come to Chinese family dinner, because my extended family is maybe not, they don't say it outright, but they're like maybe uncomfortable with like white people being brought into the family in a really casual way. Yeah. And it's not like, obviously my mom is white and they accept her and they love her. But for some reason that happened all over again in my generation when I was like also dating a white guy. And they never really, like, I don't remember specifically being treated differently because I'm mixed in my Chinese side of the family. They consider like my facial features like very pretty, I guess, because of the mix or something. So like that's awkward, but it wasn't like any other awkwardness came from me not being able to speak Cantonese fluently, which doesn't have to do with me being mixed. It just has to do with a failure to learn Cantonese fluently. So it wasn't like, oh, she's mixed, so she's like less than us. It was just like, oh, there's certain conversations that we can't have with her, like, because we don't speak enough, we don't speak enough English and she doesn't speak enough Cantonese. But actually, conversely, I did struggle with explaining to my parents experiences of being mixed, because my parents are very, like, they come from a more of a 70s mindset of looking at race, where it's like, it's not like total color blindness, but it's more like, we accept you for what you are, but like, you're all individuals. And now kind of the way that our generation looks at race is more of a like celebration of whatever specific thing you are. And so I kind of struggled growing up telling my parents, hey, I'm having like struggles that are unique to being a mixed race person. Cause they were like, it's fine. Like everybody's an individual. And I was like, nah, but like it's super awkward because people at school call me Asian because I'm the only Asian one. Like just, hey, Asian, as if that is my name, but it is not. And like that was something that definitely affected my mental health, but was hard to explain to my parents, where I was like, I am a unique, like being half something is like, that caused so much inner strife for me, especially when I was growing up, because it's like you feel not wholly one thing and not wholly the other thing. And white people think that I am too Asian, and some Asian people think that I am too white. And so I like belong to, like, my parents were like, you belong to both groups. And I'm like, what if I belong to neither group? And so that was something that was hard to explain to my parents, where even though they were really open and accepting about certain things, it took like a decade for me to be able to explain exactly what it was like to grow up a half this and a half that.
So that's very interesting. I, again, mixed person over here too. I grew up being told like, oh, hey, you're just Asian. Just put Asian down for everything. You're Asian, right? And growing up, I looked like an Asian child, right? With maybe some slight features, but then it was weird because as I grew up, it started to get more and more like blurred line, you know. So I grew up as, hey, yeah, you're the Asian kid, you know, because I ended up looking like the only Asian kid in the class, and all of a sudden it started transitioning to where it blurred a little bit, that my Hispanic features started like showing a little bit more. So I was almost, I guess, a chameleon in both races, I guess, because half of the people I ran into would assume that I was Asian, and half the other people would assume that I was Hispanic, and they would just assume that way. And again, it it's this weird growing up as a mixed child, because that ends up like, oh, you're one thing, but then people start calling you another thing, and you don't really know how to feel about it. Because for me, growing up in the Asian household, they just told me you're Asian, right? And I was like, oh, okay, what about the Hispanic background, you know, or what about this, you know? And I was like, nope, you're Asian. I was like, okay, sure. And then
what is the word for that? Because it's not whitewashing, then it is Asian washing.
Yellow washing? I'm not sure. But at the same time, I had another thought and I lost it. But yeah, it's weird when you growing up, and you said you have the Chinese family dinners. We had kind of the same thing where we had family dinners, and they did the thing where like they would always like try and like, oh, you got good bone structure, you look pretty good, or your skin looks nice and white, or this and that, or they always like kind of like criticize. They're like, complimenting, but it's criticism at the same time.
Yeah, like a constant judgment of like where your features fall on the spectrum because you're a mixed person.
Yeah, and it's really all kind of just like a long game of like, I don't know if you ever went through this, but for me, it was everybody, all of my cousins and everybody was always just compared to each other, and they were always kind of put into like, hey, do you go to Cambodia and marry this one girl, or do this, or marry this one guy, or to another cousin or something like that. It's always just kind of like it's always trying to set up someone with another person who is of the same heritage. And it's always just like, oh no, that's not how I really wanted to do things. And so it's a weird thing, because like the family dinners and the Asian family dinners, I guess, if you want to call it that, it's dealing with the mental illness that you have doesn't get recognized by anybody, and at the same time, everyone has kind of like the weird complimentary slash condescending, like,
Well, it's kind of like
look
a
at you.
trying to control. It's like other people are trying to control your identity.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm sure that happens for, any immigrants in America, but then I've experienced it from the perspective of being a mixed person where my whatever mix I am is constantly being judged or controlled or claimed or rejected by either side. And, I've had like friends that say, how come you look more Asian than I would expect you to if you're only half? And I'm like,
Yeah, I was like,
what does that even,
I don't even know if
how
that's
do I
is that
react to that?
is that a slight? Are you trying to slight me? And it's almost, yeah, they have the Asian families that we grew up, or I grew up in, have like mastery of like saying something in a way that it sounds like it could be like a slight against you, or it could be a compliment,
and
but you don't really know.
They didn't strictly say whether or not it was good or bad, but it is uncomfortable somehow.
Yeah.
And then for me, I know that I'm like my appearance was compared to that of my like full Chinese family. And like in like Chinese culture, as stereotypically, like really pale skin is valued, and then certain types of features, and there is a whole thing about eyelids that that would take a long time to get into, but basically it's considered good if you have the eyelids that I have that are double eyelid, and bad if you have the monolid. So I was always really uncomfortable with situations where clearly like my appearance was being ranked like higher than my cousins because they had monolids or whatever. And I'm like, I disagree with this, and I don't want to be a part of your horrible cousin ranking system.
Yeah, and that's the culture we ended up growing up in.
Yeah.
Like,
and it affects your mental health a lot, though, because even though it's not, that stuff isn't like you strictly talking about depression or whatever, but it's like your entire identity is being evaluated, and your appearance is being evaluated by like forces outside of your control that have all this like cultural history behind them. So you can't even you can't just be like, I'm going to sit my auntie down and explain to her that judging people based on their eyelids is wrong, because like you have no hope of changing that.
You can't change that now because they've gone so long. The only thing we can do is try and hope for bettering the future. And it's weird because for you, like, to bring it back around too, like when my thought that I lost brought it back. The discussion on mental health and depression and everything like that didn't happen for me up until I was an adult, like just recently, within the past few years. That discussion of like, it's a thing.
And do you talk to extended family about it?
Yeah, and so now like it's being brought more and more slowly, but it's starting to be talked about more. And it's an interesting thing where like my whole life growing up, like it was a thing that like sickness and especially mental illness and things like that doesn't exist, right? Even when we run into someone who has something where, I mean, not technically, where they're having issues or something like that, they're just, oh, they have a problem or they're crazy or something like that, and that's kind of just brushed off to the side, and like they become like distant family now, like,
it's like a shame thing.
And it's something where it's like, if we were really a group, like tight-knit group, like we should be like trying to help them, but like they're more about like ranking everybody and like getting the best ones, the best of the family to move forward, and so it's interesting thing because like the discussion on mental illness like that didn't happen until like for me into the recent like past few years, and getting other people to realize like maybe you're going through something like that's the, like discussion now with like my father and things like that. Like this all is coming to a head like recently. It's not it didn't happen like when I was a kid, and so it was pretty much just me being set in my ways of like, oh, I'm now like the depression is like the roots are like growing deep now, and like it's ingrained in my whole like lifestyle and what I'm doing, like not lifestyle, but like what I now how I react to my normal life, and like it's a constant thing where it's like, okay, this is I've grown up being burned in this fire, so now I'm used to being in this fire. Now, like just trying to step out of it is hard, you know.
Yeah.
And so, it's so ingrained in my life at the moment that like now that I'm talking about it and getting other people to realize, like, you know, talking about it to other family about like, hey, you know, maybe, you know, let's talk about this, and we're talking about it and getting them to realize that maybe they're going through something as well. And like for like I think we talked about plenty of times where we're like, we somehow have this innate ability to suss out other people like who are dealing with like some sort of mental illness or some sort of like, we can kind of like, I don't know, it's a sixth sense, I don't know what you want to call it, but like you can tell when someone is also going through something. And for me, I call it empathy, or for me, I feel like I have like these like feelings where like I can empathize with someone very well. It's like, okay, you know what, you're going through something, because I can feel what you're going through just by talking to you. And like, hey, are you going through something? Are you feeling all right? And as I start to prod and we talk about it, it starts like opening up. And then it's like, oh, hey, you know, maybe we should do this, maybe you should talk about this, or maybe you should talk to your doctor. And it's all about like trying to set a precedent of like moving forward, hey, let's change things, and let's not like have it be like how it's always been. You know, let's not like just ignore it. You know, ignoring it creates, you know, it starts to grow and it starts to take root, and then it gets harder to pull out. So
I get frustrated because I'm like, it's not our responsibility to like go up the generations and be like, hey, the expectations that you have for your children are making them depressed and anxious. I'm like, that shouldn't be my job. But at the same time, I also do feel like that's important work, and that if we can do it, then we should do it. I don't really, so I haven't really had these conversations with my extended family on either side. And I guess it's because partly during the Great Depression, I kind of just isolated myself from like everybody. And now I've moved away from New York. But I think if I were to move back or want to go back and see my family, I would definitely think it was important to be honest about, especially I think so. The thing that would be considered most scandalous is about how I didn't have a job when I was too depressed to have a job. Like that would be considered like a failure and a shame and stuff like that. So I think that's like the most important thing that I can like come out to my family about, is like, this thing happened to me because of mental health problems, and I'm still a worthwhile member of the family, even though I didn't have a job for a while. Because it's like, there's a big, what are you doing to provide for your family? Like, money is super important, working is super important. And so for me to go and be like, I didn't have a job for a full year because I was too depressed to get out of bed and I couldn't, like, I'm not sure what the reaction would be to that, but I think that's something that would be important for me to be able to say, and just be like, here it is, judge me, you know? But in my extended family, there's definitely been a lot of people that have struggled with addiction and depression and stuff like that, that those people are also kind of considered, like, we talk about them a little, but it's like we talk about them as if it's a cautionary tale, like, don't be like them, you know, rather than celebrating, rather than A, loving members of your family more unconditionally, and then B, celebrating people who have problems but are still trying to fight against their demons, you know, rather than being like, oh, this person is strong because they struggle with addiction, which is a disease, but they are trying to fight it. Being like, oh, like, hushed voice, like, your uncle, blah, 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 struggled with blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
like,
that's,
we don't talk about that,
and
which
again,
is a really unhealthy way.
It's a very
to live.
unhealthy way of dealing with things. But that's, I guess that's just, I don't know where that stems from. Like, where we're in the culture that like was created where like we don't talk about that
Yeah.
stuff
And
at
I
all,
think,
and
I
they
mean,
brush that stuff off
I'm sure
because
that stuff
everyone goes through
happens
everything.
in like white families too, but I feel like it really happens in Asian families
Yeah.
and some of my other immigrant friends' families, that it's just like extra shameful because of how important being
Yeah.
like successful and working and job stuff and you're like doing right by your family
Yeah.
is, and that if you are struggling with something that interferes with your ability to like work and provide for your family, then you're like less than other people, and that's super messed up, but that's definitely a thing that I grew up around, and
Yeah.
that it didn't come from my parents directly, but I definitely feel like my dad sort of rebelled, not necessarily loudly, but just quietly rebelled in the way that he raised us against the way that he was raised and
Hmm.
against the values that he was raised with. Because he was the youngest child and he was like the favorite child. And I think he always kind of felt bad about having this random favorite child thing assigned to
Hmm.
him, that he like, yeah, you shouldn't have favorite children, you shouldn't do that. You know, that sucks.
Yeah.
And so I think that like affected him a lot, and other things in his past affected him a lot, where he realized, oh, a bunch of this stuff is really unhealthy, the stuff that I've been raised with, and I'm not going to do that to my kids.
Yeah.
So as much as, you know, there are certain things that we weren't able to talk about until more recently, he already did so much work in his own head, not being like some of the toxic things that he grew up around, that I think that's pretty incredible. And then I hope that if I were to have kids, that I would reject even more of toxic things that I've grown up around and kind of try to do even better. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Even for me right now, where I'm very much separated from my extended family, especially the extended Asian family, because when everything came to a head with me and everything was at like its darkest dark point, um, a lot of like bonds and relationships were kind of severed for me. Again, my road to trying to stay here and be here every Tuesday brought with this, a decimation of like my bonds and relationships with everybody. And so being exposed to that toxic, type of like family and that toxic like relationship with them, I hope that like, that they take steps into like, moving forward and like being more open minded. But of course, I'm fairly sure like because of me being more open about my depression and being more um talking about it more and trying to, and the things that I had to do to try and like keep myself afloat, um that I spiraled out. And I'm sure that people like on my extended family are all just like, oh, he's kind of like, they kind of brush me off, and I'm probably in some sort of like exile from the extended family right now because like, oh, he's probably crazy now or something like that, and I'm okay for right now, just keeping myself away from that, toxic
Yeah.
relationship and everything like that. And the relationship with like my family that I have right now with my father and with my mother, and like we're all like, I'm spearheading more of just like, hey, let's talk about it more. Let's be open more. And like they're taking more steps, and it's really hard because they're deep rooted into their into their ways, but like they're starting to open up more and they're starting to talk about it more, and they're seeking aid for what they have as well. And so that's positives. It's a long road, and it's been a long road, but that's what we grew up in, I guess. I mean, it's always just been like a weird, our cultures that we deal with in life, and everyone else out there who has their own. I'm sure that there are similarities, maybe not exact, but like there are cultures and ways that people deal with things. And I'm sure that like there's some people out there who have cultures that like kind of brush off like the kind of more things that people don't talk about nowadays. But hopefully, like as we continue on towards like the future, we can start opening up the dialogue more and keep it like it's a normal thing that we can talk about, and it's an open thing we can talk about. That's kind of what this show is about, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
positives.
And I feel frustrated with people in my family that perpetuate this kind of stuff and those kind of attitudes against people who are struggling with mental illness or addiction or other stuff like that, or even just people who tie your scholastic or financial achievement to your like worth as a person, you know, or how your eyelids look to your worth as a person. But then I also feel bad for them because they are still living in a world that is like terrible. And they shouldn't have to live there. And obviously, like, culture and, you know, maybe their parents or whatever their upbringing, like something made them that way. It's not like you're born a baby that thinks that certain types of eyelids are better than other eyelids. But like, so I feel bad, but also frustrated because at a certain point, there is a responsibility on you as an adult to like evaluate the way that you're looking at things and be like, is this productive or is it toxic? Am I hurting myself? Am I hurting other people? So I have mixed feelings about, you know, that. I feel like even this podcast might be considered, if people found out about it, I don't know if it would be considered like a shameful overshare about my failings as a person, but I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I went into this understanding like, if anybody found out, like not that they, it's not very hard not to find out about this. We kind of try to put it out there on social media, but it's if extended family like took a listen, if they could understand it, it doesn't really matter to me at the moment. You can either accept family as they are and take what they are in stride, you know, whether it's addiction, whether it's mental health, or whether it's some sort of sickness that they're dealing with. It shouldn't just be something that's ignored. It should be something that, like, if you're family and if you really are family, you should be able to talk about it, support, and try and open your minds to it, you know, and try and like move forward with it together. But people like to, and certain families like to surgically cut things out and like, we picked the best eyelids, this, you know, and so it's, you know, we'll see how it goes as we keep trucking along with our little podcast here. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen, right? You have an open dialogue with your dad now and everything like that.
Yeah.
So that's
so I feel
really
like
positive.
the people that mattered the most, you know, like as far as whose opinions I care about, are supportive, and that's good. But then I guess again, it's a sort of a self-sorting thing where like, if you look at me being open about mental health struggles as a bad thing, then you have now sorted yourself into a category of person whose opinion I don't care about.
Yeah, and same with me. So I mean, we have people who listen, and hopefully you're getting something out of this where you're relating to it and can understand what we're going through. And again, this is just us talking, and that's positives, because that's one of the most important things on your way to coping with what you have with mental illness or depression, or, you know, anything. You want to create a dialogue, you want to talk to somebody, you know, because being quiet and having it ignored, that it's toxic, and it's toxic to yourself if you do that to yourself, and it's toxic if you're part of a family who's doing that to other people, you know. So
yeah, and you don't have to talk about your issues if you don't want to, but what we want is to create space where people can talk about their issues if they want to, and where it is okay to tell your family about this kind of thing, because it is very terrible to want to ask for help and want to be honest about your feelings and what you're struggling with. And then to know that if you said something, it would either be not understood or considered shameful. And so something that like you're supposed to be quiet about and just deal with on your own, because that's very isolating and it only makes you feel worse.
Yeah.
So let us know if you guys have thoughts about, you know, whatever your culture is and the way that it affects how you guys talk about depression and mental illness, or maybe you're just like solidly American but you have similar struggles, or maybe you are a second generation immigrant but your parents are just like super chill and perfect about mental health stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we love to hear what everyone's experiences have been growing up with, in the environment that they grew up in, because that it's weird because again, comparing what we've gone through, like it's almost as if things are very similar but different.
Yeah,
Again,
there's
like there's a
common
contrast,
threads,
there's a
but
common
then
threads, but like my upbringing being very abrasive and like blunt, and not being able to talk about any of this up until like just recently, when everything kind of just like, well, it exploded, let's figure this out, and trying to hold it together with glue and rubber bands and things like that. And then for you wanting to reach out and then slowly introducing that, and like having the parents who were open about it, but then still having that like toxic sort of family, extended family,
Yeah.
that still judged you on eyelids and things like that. So
Yeah. Well, and that's why when I looked for a therapist, and I think I've talked about this before, I like was looking for an Asian therapist, or a therapist that like knew enough about Asian culture to be able to contextualize the stuff that I was saying in a way that's like not just stereotypical, like, oh, of course there are these standards because she's Asian, because it's like obviously not all Asian people are like that, and my dad's not like that, but then like some people are, like the pinching is real, the eyelids thing is real, and
the food thing is real.
Yeah.
Like, have you eaten? That's
and so it was important to me to be able to have like a safe space to talk about that stuff without everything being either a confirmation or a denial of stereotypes.
Yeah. For a question, right? And this is going back to like the question of like, when they ask you, have you eaten? Did they ever ask you in a certain way where it's like, have you eaten? Because they think that you haven't eaten at all?
Yes, sometimes it was definitely a judgment that I was too skinny. Like sometimes they'd be like, I've been directly asked, like, did you lose weight or whatever? But then sometimes they were pleased that I had lost weight. So it's a little bit confusing. I never
interesting, because this is night and day here. This is night and day. Like for me, they're like,
you should.
Have you eaten? Because you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, look at this. It's skin and bones. And they're like, no, look at that.
They feel your wrist too. Yeah, they totally feel your wrist.
And I was like, why are you poking my stomach? No, don't look at that. Look at this. There's nothing here. It's skin and bones.
It was sometimes that I was too skinny. Sometimes that I had lost weight, but it was a good thing. Sometimes that I was maybe too puffy in the face or whatever. But I didn't really want to ask follow-up questions like, please explain whether this is a criticism or a weird body compliment that I didn't want, because people who are eating disorder survivors don't necessarily want body compliments either.
Yeah.
But so it was like a little bit unclear. And in that sense, there's sometimes like even just a language barrier thing that I decided to hide behind so that I didn't have to find out more about
Where it's like,
what this body discussion was.
What do you mean? No, I'm sorry. I don't understand. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's a thing. Depression foods, rice, just white rice. That right there is a depression food.
Eat the perfect amount of it.
Yeah, which is a lot of it. They're just like, here, just slap it on into the bowl. You eat more rice than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. They'll ask you, have you eaten? And then they'll constantly pile more onto you. It's like, oh, have you eaten? You have? Well, here's more. Here, have more. And it's like, but no, you just said this. So, well, Kris, take us home.
Well, we would love to hear from you guys. Like we were saying before, whether or not you are Asian or mixed or first generation immigrant or second generation, or your family's been here forever, let us know how your upbringing and your culture have affected, the way that you look at depression and mental health and food and any of that stuff. Let us know whether you get pinched too.
If you get pinched like all over, it's like, no, stop pinching. No, don't pinch my arms. No,
and
that's not
if
where
you
it
guys
goes.
have any ideas for future episodes that you would like us to talk about, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at yikesland@gmail.com. You can also keep up with us and our episode releases on Instagram at yikesland_podcast. We tweet and we Facebook as well, so you can always reach us there. And if you guys are having a hard time and you need someone to reach out to, Jelani, what is a good resource for that?
Please, if you guys are on the edge or anything like that, please head over to pick up the phone. If you need someone to talk to, dial the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's confidential, it's free, they're always available to be able to talk to you guys if you are spiraling and you are in dire need of something, or we don't want you to not make it to another date with us. So please call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Toll free, please. It's confidential, and we just want you to make sure that you're here with us every day, and every Tuesday. Not just because our little show here drops every Tuesday, but knowing that you have made it to another Tuesday, that means that you can make it to the next one as well. And that's what we want. We want you to be able to cope and strive and keep going, no matter what. And that's what we want.
Well, thanks for being here with us today, guys. We hope you enjoyed the views from Yikesland.
From Asian Yikesland.
And we will see you next Tuesday.
Yep. See you guys next Tuesday.